Help me. The little girl cried in a biker bar. The Hells Angels' next move froze everyone. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The rain had been falling over the small highway town of Cedar Ridge since late afternoon, turning the quiet streets into rivers of silver under the glow of old streetlights. On the edge of town stood a place that most locals avoided after dark, a low brick building with a flickering neon sign that read Iron Horse Bar. The deep rumble of motorcycles lined outside told anyone passing by exactly who gathered there. Inside the bar, the air carried the smell of leather jackets, engine oil, and strong whiskey. Heavy boots rested on wooden floors scarred by decades of hard nights and louder stories. At a corner table sat Marcus Steele Donovan, a massive man with gray in his beard and the calm posture of someone who had spent many years riding long American highways. His leather vest carried the well-known wings patch of the Hells Angels across the back. Around him the room buzzed with deep laughter and the sound of country rock echoing from an old jukebox. For most people, the bar looked like the last place on earth where a frightened child would ever walk through the door. That was why what happened next felt almost unreal. The front door suddenly burst open as a cold gust of rain swept across the wooden floor. Conversation stopped in mid-sentence. The music kept playing for a second before someone quietly pulled the power cord from the machine. Standing in the doorway was a little girl no older than 8 years old. Her small sneakers were soaked from the rain, and strands of dark hair clung to her face. Her chest rose and fell as if she had been running for a long distance down the empty highway. For a brief moment, she looked around the room at the towering men in leather vests and tattooed arms. Any other child might have turned around and fled into the storm. Instead, she took a step forward and shouted with all the strength her small voice could gather. "Help me." The word echoed through the bar like a sudden crack of thunder. Chairs scraped across the floor as dozens of bikers turned toward the tiny figure standing beneath the yellow ceiling lights. Marcus slowly lifted his head. His sharp blue eyes locked on the frightened girl, and in that instant he saw something that the others had not yet noticed. Fear. Not the kind that comes from getting lost or falling down. This was the deeper kind of fear that no child should ever carry. The girl clutched her arms around herself and glanced nervously back toward the dark road outside, as if expecting someone terrible to appear at any second. Marcus rose from his chair, the old wood creaking beneath his weight as the room fell completely silent around him. The largest man in the bar began walking toward the smallest person in the room, and before anyone understood why, the entire atmosphere of the Iron Horse Bar changed. Marcus Steele Donovan stopped a few steps away from the little girl and lowered himself slowly onto one knee so that his eyes were level with hers. The entire Iron Horse Bar watched in silence. 40 hardened riders who had crossed deserts, mountains, and endless miles of American highway suddenly seemed unsure what to do with a trembling child standing in the middle of their world. The girl looked at Marcus with wide eyes filled with uncertainty. She saw the heavy leather vest on his shoulders, the deep lines across his weathered face, and the thick gray beard that made him look more like a mountain than a man. For a moment it seemed like she might run again. Marcus raised both hands slowly to show that he meant no harm. His voice came out low and calm, like distant thunder rolling across open land. "Kid, look at me. You are safe here." The girl hesitated before meeting his eyes. Up close, Marcus could see how exhausted she was. Her breathing came fast and shallow, and mud covered the sides of her sneakers, as if she had run through fields or ditches to get here. A faint scrape marked her knee, but the injury looked minor. What mattered more was the fear in her expression, fear that did not belong on the face of a child. Marcus spoke again, softer this time. "What is your name?" The girl swallowed hard before answering. "Emily. My name is Emily Carter." The moment she said the words, her voice cracked and tears began sliding down her cheeks. Marcus reached behind him without turning his head, and someone immediately placed a clean bar towel into his hand. He handed it gently to Emily. "It is all right, Emily. You are among friends now." One of the older bikers named Frank Wheeler stepped forward from the bar counter. Frank had been riding with Marcus for almost 15 years, and his thick, white mustache twitched as he studied the situation. Frank spoke quietly. "Steele, you want me to call the sheriff?" Marcus kept his eyes on Emily while answering. "Not yet. Let us hear what she has to say first." Emily gripped the towel in both hands, as if it were the only solid thing left in the world. She glanced again toward the rain-soaked road outside the open door. The wind pushed cold air across the floorboards, and somewhere in the distance thunder rolled across the hills surrounding Cedar Ridge. Marcus noticed the way her shoulders tightened every time she looked back toward the darkness outside. He spoke carefully. "Emily, who are you running from?" The girl lowered her voice until it was barely louder than the rain tapping against the windows. "A man." Marcus felt the room grow colder, even though the heater near the wall hummed steadily. "What man, Emily?" Her hands trembled. "He locked me in the back of his truck. Said we were going on a long trip. Said nobody would find me." Several bikers exchanged dark looks. Marcus remained perfectly still, but something behind his eyes changed. Emily continued, her words coming out faster now, as if the memory itself was chasing her. "The truck stopped near the gas station on the highway outside town. He went inside to buy something. I saw the door was not closed all the way, so I ran. I just kept running until I saw the lights here." She looked around the room again at the large men wearing the same winged patch across their backs. "I did not know where else to go." The room remained silent for a long moment. Finally, Marcus spoke in the same steady voice he used when calming frightened horses during long rides across open country. "You came to the right place, Emily. Nobody is taking you anywhere tonight." The girl nodded slowly, but her eyes suddenly widened again as she stared past Marcus toward the dark road outside. Every biker in the room followed her gaze. Far down the wet highway, a pair of headlights had just appeared through the curtain of rain, slowly turning into the gravel lot in front of the Iron Horse bar. The headlights moved slowly through the curtain of rain until the vehicle rolled into the gravel parking lot outside the Iron Horse bar. The sound of tires crunching against loose stones carried clearly through the open doorway. Every biker in the room turned toward the entrance. Emily Carter stiffened beside Marcus Steele Donovan and grabbed the edge of his leather vest with both small hands. Her voice came out in a frightened whisper. "That is him." Marcus did not move right away. He simply looked toward the door as the truck engine shut off outside. The quiet that followed seemed heavier than the thunder rolling across the hills beyond Cedar Ridge. The Iron Horse bar had seen plenty of trouble over the years. Drunk ranch hands, angry gamblers, and once even a group of thieves who thought they could intimidate a room full of riders. None of those situations had ended well for the troublemakers. But this moment felt different. This time the danger was not for the men inside the bar. It was for the small child standing among them. Marcus slowly stood up to his full height. When he did, the ceiling lights reflected across the silver threads in his beard, and the heavy wings patch on his vest seemed to stretch even wider across his shoulders. Frank Wheeler stepped closer to the doorway and glanced out through the rain. His deep voice carried across the room. "Black pickup truck. Older model. One man inside. He just turned off the engine." Several bikers quietly pushed their chairs back from the tables. No one rushed. No one raised their voice. They moved with the calm precision of men who had spent years watching out for each other on long highways and dangerous roads. Marcus placed one large hand gently on Emily's shoulder. "Stay behind me." She nodded, but her fingers tightened on his vest. Through the open door, they could now hear a truck door slam shut outside. A moment later, heavy footsteps moved across the gravel. Each step seemed slower and more deliberate than the last. Whoever the man was, he had already seen the motorcycles parked outside the bar. He knew exactly what kind of place he was walking into. Frank leaned slightly toward Marcus and spoke under his breath. "Steele, this could get ugly." Marcus answered without taking his eyes from the doorway. "Only if he makes it ugly." The footsteps stopped just outside the door. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Rain poured from the edge of the roof in steady streams, and lightning flickered far away beyond the dark hills. Then the door pushed open again. A tall man stepped inside. He wore a soaked denim jacket and a dark baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. Water dripped from his sleeves onto the wooden floor. His face carried the hard expression of someone who believed he controlled every situation he entered. But that confidence faded slightly when he saw the room he had just walked into. Nearly 40 bikers stood or sat around the bar, all wearing the same unmistakable patch across their backs. The Hell Angel's wings spread wide across leather vests like silent warnings. The man scanned the room until his eyes landed on Emily. Relief flashed across his face for a moment. Then irritation followed close behind. There you are. He stepped forward 2 paces and pointed toward the girl. Emily instinctively moved closer behind Marcus' broad frame. The man spoke again, louder this time, as if the situation were simple. That girl is coming with me. Marcus did not move from where he stood between the man and the child. His voice remained calm, but carried enough weight to stop conversations across a crowded highway bar. You should explain that statement very carefully. The man narrowed his eyes. That is my kid. She ran from the truck while I stopped for gas. I am taking her home. Several bikers exchanged silent looks. Marcus lowered his gaze toward Emily for just a second. Her small head shook slowly from side to side. When Marcus looked back at the stranger, his expression had changed. The calm remained, but something colder had settled behind his eyes. Outside, thunder rolled again across the dark highway as the iron horse bar prepared for whatever came next. Marcus Steele Donovan did not move from where he stood. The rain outside continued to hammer the gravel lot, and the thunder rolling across the distant hills seemed to echo the tension inside the iron horse bar. The man in the soaked denim jacket waited for someone to step aside. No one did. Emily Carter pressed closer behind Marcus, her small fingers gripping the back of his vest as if it were the only safe place left in the world. The stranger let out a slow breath and shook water from the brim of his baseball cap. His voice grew sharper. I already told you. That girl is mine. She ran off while I stopped for gas. I am taking her home now. Marcus studied the man carefully. Years of long rides and hard roads had taught him how to read people in a matter of seconds. The stranger was trying to appear calm, but small details told another story. His shoulders were stiff. His eyes moved too quickly around the room. And the moment he realized how many bikers surrounded him, the confidence in his voice had begun to crack. Marcus spoke in the same steady tone he had used with Emily earlier. What is her full name? The man hesitated for the briefest moment. That pause did not escape anyone in the room. The stranger cleared his throat. Emily. Her name is Emily. Several riders quietly shifted their weight. Frank Wheeler crossed his arms over his chest near the door. Marcus asked another question without raising his voice. Emily what? The man blinked as if annoyed by the conversation. Why does that matter? She is my daughter, and that is all you need to know. Behind Marcus, the little girl shook her head again. Her voice came out small, but clear enough for everyone in the bar to hear. He is lying. The room felt even quieter than before. The man turned toward Emily, and his expression hardened. You better stop that right now. You are coming with me whether you like it or not. Emily gripped Marcus' vest tighter and pressed her face against his back. Marcus slowly stepped forward, placing himself fully between the stranger and the child. The heavy wooden floor creaked under his boots. The movement alone was enough to make several other bikers shift closer to the center of the room. Marcus spoke again. What is your name? The man lifted his chin as if the question insulted him. David. David Turner. Marcus nodded slowly as if filing the name away somewhere deep in his mind. All right, David Turner. Let us clear something up before you take another step. The man frowned. What is that supposed to mean? Marcus gestured slightly toward the frightened girl behind him. That child says she does not belong to you. And in this bar we tend to listen when someone that's scared asks for help. David Turner let out a harsh laugh that carried no humor. You think I care about what a kid says? She ran away from home. I'm just trying to get her back where she belongs. Frank Wheeler spoke from near the door. Funny thing about that story. Most fathers do not chase their daughters down the highway in the middle of a storm. The man shot Frank a sharp look, but did not answer. Marcus' eyes remained fixed on the stranger. Emily's voice trembled behind him. He locked the truck door from the outside. Said we were going somewhere far away. Marcus felt a quiet anger rise deep in his chest, but his expression did not change. He simply looked back at David Turner. The silence stretched across the room like a tight rope ready to snap. Outside, lightning flashed across the sky, and for a moment the entire bar glowed white through the windows. Marcus finally spoke again, and his voice carried a weight that made several bikers straighten their backs. Then here is how this is going to work. Until the truth is clear, that girl is not leaving this bar with you tonight. David Turner stared at Marcus Steele Donovan for several long seconds as the rain pounded against the windows of the Iron Horse bar. The tension inside the room had thickened like storm clouds gathering before a tornado. Nearly every biker in the building had shifted closer, not in a threatening rush, but in the quiet way a pack of wolves closes ranks when something dangerous approaches their territory. David let out a slow breath and forced a tight smile that did not reach his eyes. You people have no idea what you are getting involved in. This is a family matter. That girl belongs with me. Marcus did not respond immediately. Instead, he slowly turned his head toward Emily Carter behind him. The little girl was still clutching the back of his vest, her small fingers trembling against the worn leather. Marcus lowered himself down to one knee again so that he could look directly at her. The massive biker who had faced down violent men on lonely highways now spoke with a calm that surprised even the riders standing nearby. Emily, I need you to tell me something honestly. Did you come here because you wanted help? Emily nodded quickly. Yes. Marcus continued gently. Did that man lock you in his truck? Emily wiped tears from her cheeks with the edge of the towel Frank had given her earlier. Yes. He said we were going far away and that nobody would find me. The room grew colder again. Several riders exchanged dark looks. Frank Wheeler leaned against the door frame with his arms folded, watching David Turner carefully. Marcus stood back up and turned toward the man again. His voice remained calm, but the weight behind it had changed. You heard her. David shrugged as if the words meant nothing. Kids say all kinds of things when they are scared. She probably got upset because I told her we were moving. That is what this is about. Marcus tilted his head slightly. Then tell me something simple, David Turner. If she is your daughter, what town do you live in? The man hesitated again. Just outside Cedar Ridge. Marcus waited. The silence stretched long enough that several bikers quietly began shifting their boots across the floor. David finally answered. About 10 miles down the highway. Marcus nodded slowly. Then you will not mind if we call the sheriff and let him sort this out. The moment those words left Marcus' mouth, the man's expression changed. The forced confidence vanished, and something sharper appeared in his eyes. That will not be necessary. I told you already this is a family situation. Marcus folded his arms across his chest. In this town, when a scared child runs into a bar asking for help, it stops being private real fast. Behind Marcus, Emily's voice came out small but determined. My last name is Carter. My mom lives in Pine Creek. The man spun toward her with sudden anger. Shut your mouth. The room reacted instantly. Boots scraped across wood, and several riders took one step forward at the same time. Marcus did not raise his voice, but when he spoke again, the command in his tone froze the movement in the air. You will lower your voice when you talk to her. David Turner looked around the bar, and for the first time, seemed to understand the situation clearly. Nearly 40 bikers stood between him and the door. None of them looked amused. None of them looked nervous either. Outside, thunder rolled again across the hills. Marcus glanced toward Frank Wheeler near the entrance. Frank slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His eyes remained fixed on David while he spoke calmly. Sheriff office is about 15 minutes from here on a night like this. We can wait. David Turner took a step back as the reality of the room closed in around him. For a moment it looked as if he might try to leave. But instead he clenched his jaw and said something that sent a ripple of unease through the bar. You people have no idea who you are interfering with tonight. David Turner's words hung in the air like the last rumble of thunder rolling across the dark hills outside Cedar Ridge. For a few seconds nobody inside the Iron Horse bar spoke. The rain continued tapping against the windows and water dripped steadily from the stranger jacket onto the wooden floor. Marcus Steele Donovan stood unmoving in the center of the room, with Emily Carter protected behind him. The little girl still clutched the back of his vest, as if letting go might cause the world to collapse again. Frank Wheeler remained near the door with his phone in hand, but he had not yet placed the call. Marcus' eyes stayed locked on David Turner, yet something inside his mind had shifted. The words spoken by the stranger had stirred an old memory buried deep beneath years of road dust and quiet nights. Marcus had seen that same kind of threat before. Not loud, not reckless, but dangerous in a quieter way that made the air grow colder. For a brief moment the noise of the bar faded, and another scene from long ago rose into his mind. It had been a late autumn evening more than 20 years earlier on a lonely county road. Outside a small town called Red Valley. Marcus had been younger then, still learning the difference between strength and wisdom. His motorcycle had been parked outside a roadside diner, while he and two other riders shared coffee before a long ride west. That was when the screaming started outside. A girl about the same age as Emily had run across the gravel lot toward the diner door. Her clothes had been torn, and her voice carried the same desperate fear Marcus had heard only minutes ago inside the Iron Horse bar. Marcus and the others had rushed outside, but the headlights of a speeding truck had already disappeared down the empty road. The sheriff arrived later that night. Search teams combed the woods and highways for days. The girl was never found. Marcus had carried that memory like a stone in his chest for years. A moment when someone had needed help and the world had been too slow to respond. The memory faded as the sound of rain returned to his ears, and the present moment snapped back into focus. Marcus looked down slightly toward the small hands gripping his vest. Emily Carter stood behind him shaking with quiet fear, but she had not run away. She had chosen to trust the strangers inside this bar. Marcus took a slow breath and lifted his head again. His voice remained calm, but there was a new firmness behind every word. "You said we do not understand who we are interfering with." David Turner narrowed his eyes. "That is right." Marcus nodded once, as if accepting the statement. Then he answered quietly, "That might be true, but there is something you do not understand either." The man frowned. "And what is that?" Marcus glanced briefly around the room. Nearly 40 bikers stood silently watching the exchange. Some leaned against the bar counter, while others rested their hands on the backs of wooden chairs. Every one of them had turned their attention toward the frightened girl standing in the middle of their gathering place. Marcus spoke again. "In this room, if a child walks in scared and asks for help, then that child belongs under our protection until the truth is clear." David Turner shifted his weight uneasily. "You cannot stop me from taking her." Marcus' expression did not change, but the quiet strength in his voice grew stronger. "We are not trying to stop you from doing anything lawful. But until the sheriff arrives, nobody is forcing that child into a truck tonight." Emily slowly peeked around Marcus' shoulder and looked at the stranger again. The fear in her eyes had not vanished, but something else had begun to appear beside it. Hope. And across the room, the riders of the Iron Horse bar seemed to sense the same thing. The line between predator and protector had been drawn, and Marcus Steele Donovan had already chosen which side he would stand on. The heavy silence inside the Iron Horse bar stretched for several long seconds after Marcus Steele Donovan finished speaking. The rain outside had not slowed, and the wind pushed sheets of water across the gravel lot, rattling the old windows along the wall. Emily Carter still stood close behind Marcus, her small hands gripping the leather of his vest. For the first time since she had burst through the door, her breathing had begun to slow, though her eyes remained fixed on the man standing across the room. David Turner did not look pleased. The confidence he had carried into the bar was fading, but something darker was replacing it. His jaw tightened, and the muscles in his neck stood out as he glanced around the room once more. Nearly 40 bikers watched him without speaking. No one rushed forward. No one shouted threats. They simply stood there like a wall of leather and steel. David laughed once, a short bitter sound. "You people think this is some kind of game." Marcus answered calmly. "Nobody here is playing games." David pointed toward the door behind him. "My truck is sitting right outside. That girl climbed out while I was paying for gas. I came here to take her home, and you are all standing in my way." Emily's voice trembled from behind Marcus. "I told you already. I do not know him." The man turned sharply toward her. "You better stop lying before things get worse for you." Marcus took one slow step forward. The floor creaked beneath his boots, and several riders shifted slightly closer behind him. When Marcus spoke again, his voice remained steady, but the warning inside it was impossible to miss. "That is the second time you raised your voice at her." David Turner stared at him. "And what are you going to do about it?" For a moment the room seemed to hold its breath. Then Frank Wheeler cleared his throat near the door. His voice carried across the bar with the relaxed tone of someone who had seen many situations like this before. "I just called the sheriff office. They said the deputy on night patrol is already on the road. Should not take long." David turned toward him sharply. "You had no right to do that." Frank shrugged calmly. "Maybe not. But around here, when a child runs into a building asking for help, we usually let the law sort things out." The stranger ran a hand across his wet jacket as if trying to decide what to do next. His eyes flicked once toward the door and the storm outside. For a brief second it looked as if he might simply leave. But instead he took another step forward. His voice dropped lower now and carried a hard edge. "You people are making a serious mistake." Marcus tilted his head slightly. "Explain that." David hesitated. Then he said something that changed the feeling inside the room. "You think I am the problem here. But you have no idea who that girl really is." Emily stiffened behind Marcus. What do you mean? David looked directly at Marcus. Ask her where she came from. Ask her why she was alone on that highway tonight. The words settled heavily over the bar. Several riders exchanged uncertain looks. Marcus slowly glanced down toward Emily. Her fingers tightened again on his vest, and for a moment, she looked as though she might start crying. Marcus' voice softened slightly as he spoke to her. Emily, is there something you have not told us? The little girl hesitated. The room remained silent except for the distant sound of thunder rolling across the hills beyond Cedar Ridge. Finally, Emily spoke in a small voice that carried more fear than before. I ran away. The confession surprised several of the riders. David Turner spread his hands as if proving his point. See, she knows exactly why I came looking for her. But Marcus had not taken his eyes off Emily. He could see the deeper truth written across her face. Running away had not been the whole story. And somewhere in that frightened silence, another piece of the truth was still waiting to be spoken. Emily Carter, words hung in the air like the fading echo of thunder across the hills outside Cedar Ridge. I ran away. The confession settled heavily over the Iron Horse bar. Several bikers glanced at one another, unsure what to make of the statement. David Turner gave a sharp nod as if he had been waiting for that moment. There you go. You heard her. She ran off, and I tracked her down before something bad happened to her. Marcus Steele Donovan did not move right away. His eyes stayed on Emily, and he could see that the girl was trembling again, not with guilt, but with the kind of fear that comes when someone is forced to reveal only part of the truth. The rain outside continued to pour against the windows, and lightning briefly illuminated the parking lot filled with motorcycles. Marcus lowered his voice, so only Emily could hear him clearly. Running away from what? Emily hesitated. Her fingers tightened against the leather of Marcus' vest, and her eyes filled with tears that she had been holding back for too long. I ran away from the house. Marcus nodded slowly. From whose house? Emily glanced toward David Turner, and her shoulders shook. From him. The room shifted again as those words reached the ears of the riders standing nearby. David Turner scoffed loudly. That is ridiculous. She lives with me. Marcus remained calm, but his eyes had sharpened. Emily looked down at the floor, as if the wooden boards might offer her some kind of safety. My mom lives in Pine Creek. She got sick last year and had to go to the hospital. After that I had to stay with him. Her voice cracked as she continued. At first he said it was just until she got better. But then he said we were moving away and nobody needed to know where we were going. David took a step forward. That is enough. She is a child who does not understand what she is talking about. Frank Wheeler stepped sideways near the door blocking the man path, without saying a word. Marcus continued speaking softly to Emily. What happened tonight? Emily wiped her nose with the towel still clutched in her hand. He said we were leaving tonight. Said we were going to drive for a very long time and nobody would find us. I got scared when he locked the truck door. I waited until he went into the gas station, and then I ran. I just followed the lights on the road until I saw this place. The story hung in the air like a warning siren. Several bikers shifted their stance, and the mood inside the Iron Horse bar changed again. This was no longer a misunderstanding between a father and a runaway child. Marcus slowly stood to his full height again and looked across the room at David Turner. The man's expression had hardened into something colder now that the girl had spoken more openly. You are listening to a scared kid spin a story. That is all this is. Marcus' voice remained calm, but it carried a firmness that had been missing before. Funny thing about scared kids. They usually run away from something real. David clenched his jaw. You think you are some kind of hero now? Marcus answered quietly. No, but I do know when something does not feel right. The rain outside seemed to grow louder, as if the storm itself were pressing closer to the building. Emily looked up at Marcus again, and for the first time, there was more hope than fear in her expression. The riders of the Iron Horse bar had heard enough to understand that whatever truth David Turner was trying to hide had not yet fully come into the light. The words spoken by Emily Carter continued to echo quietly through the Iron Horse bar long after she finished explaining why she had run from the truck. The storm outside had grown heavier, and rain hammered against the windows while wind rattled the loose metal sign above the entrance. Inside the bar the air felt thick with tension. Marcus Steele Donovan stood between the frightened girl and David Turner without moving, his broad shoulders forming a wall that the stranger could not see past. Emily remained close behind him, her small hands still gripping the back of his vest, as if letting go might send her back into the dark highway outside. David Turner shifted his weight from one boot to the other and glanced around the room again. The sight that met him was not encouraging. Nearly 40 bikers stood scattered across the bar, leaning against tables, chairs, and the counter. None of them looked eager to leave. None of them looked frightened either. Frank Wheeler remained near the doorway with his phone still in his hand, his eyes never leaving the stranger. David tried to laugh again, but the sound came out forced. You are all letting a kid spin stories, and now you think you know the truth. That is not how the world works. Marcus answered quietly. Sometimes the truth is exactly what a frightened kid says first. David shook his head. You people are wasting time. That girl belongs with me, and you have no authority to stop it. Marcus did not raise his voice. Authority is not what we are talking about right now. David frowned. Then what are you talking about? Marcus glanced toward Frank Wheeler. Frank gave a small nod and stepped outside the door for a moment. The wind pushed rain into the entrance before he pulled the door shut again behind him. A few seconds later, the sound of a motorcycle engine roared to life outside the bar. Emily looked up in surprise. Marcus turned slightly, so she could see his face, and spoke calmly. The deputy will be on the road, but Cedar Ridge is not a big town. Sometimes help arrives faster when someone rides out to meet it. Outside, the motorcycle accelerated down the highway through the storm, heading toward the sheriff's office. David Turner watched the door as the engine sound faded into the distance. His expression darkened. You should not have done that. Marcus folded his arms across his chest. Why not? David leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. Because now you have turned a simple misunderstanding into something much bigger. Marcus remained unmoved. If it is a misunderstanding, the deputy will sort it out. The man's jaw tightened again, and for the first time real frustration appeared on his face. He looked past Marcus toward Emily. You are causing a lot of trouble right now. Emily shrank back slightly, but did not step away from Marcus. Her voice was small, but steady. I just wanted someone to help me. Those words seemed to shift the mood inside the bar once more. Several riders nodded quietly to themselves. Marcus spoke again, without looking away from David Turner. That is exactly what she got. The rain continued to pound against the roof, while thunder rolled across the hills surrounding Cedar Ridge. Time inside the Iron Horse bar moved slowly now, each minute stretching. Longer than the last, as everyone waited for the sheriff deputy to arrive. David Turner paced one step to the side, and then back again like a trapped animal trying to decide which direction offered escape. But every path in the room led past Marcus Steele Donovan and the silent riders who stood ready behind him. And as the storm raged outside the Iron Horse bar, the truth of the night was drawing closer with every passing mile on that dark American highway. The storm outside Cedar Ridge showed no sign of slowing. Rain slammed against the roof of the Iron Horse bar, while wind pushed water across the gravel lot and around the rows of motorcycles parked outside. Inside the bar, the air felt heavy with waiting. The sound of the motorcycle that Frank Wheeler had sent down the highway had faded long ago, leaving only the distant rumble of thunder and the quiet breathing of nearly 40 bikers standing in silent watch. Marcus Steele Donovan remained where he stood between Emily Carter and David Turner. He had not moved more than a few inches in several minutes, but his presence filled the center of the room like a mountain planted firmly in the ground. Emily stayed close behind him, her small hands still gripping the back of his leather vest. The girl looked exhausted now. The adrenaline that had carried her through the storm and into the bar was beginning to fade. Her eyes drooped slightly, though she forced herself to stay alert whenever David shifted even a little. David Turner paced slowly across the wooden floor again, his boots thudding with growing impatience. Every few steps he glanced toward the door, as if calculating the distance between himself and the dark highway outside. Finally he stopped and turned toward Marcus again. This is getting ridiculous. You are holding me here for no reason. Marcus answered calmly. Nobody is holding you. The door is right behind you. David frowned. Then I will take the girl and leave. Marcus shook his head once. That is the part that is not happening tonight. David clenched his fists. You cannot keep her here forever. Marcus replied quietly. We do not need forever. We just need a few more minutes. The man looked around the room again, studying the silent riders who watched him from every corner of the bar. Some leaned against the counter while others stood beside their chairs, arms folded across heavy jackets. None of them looked eager to leave. None of them looked willing to step aside either. The silence began to work against David Turner. The longer the minutes passed, the more restless he became. Finally, he spoke again with a sharp edge in his voice. You think you are protecting her, but you have no idea what you are stepping into. Marcus' eyes remained steady. Then explain it. David hesitated. His mouth opened as if he might say something more, but the words never came. Instead, he glanced toward Emily again. The girl shrank slightly behind Marcus, but she did not step away. Marcus noticed the hesitation and spoke again. If there is something we need to know, now would be the time to say it. David shook his head. You will find out soon enough. The threat in his voice hung in the air, but it sounded weaker than before. Outside, another flash of lightning lit up the windows, and a second later thunder cracked loudly over the valley. The sudden noise made Emily flinch, and Marcus felt the small movement behind him. Without turning around, he placed one hand gently behind his back so she could hold it if she needed to. The gesture was simple, but the meaning was clear. She was not facing the storm alone anymore. Across the room, several bikers exchanged quiet looks. They had seen Marcus handle many situations over the years, but something about the way he stood tonight was different. The calm patience in his posture told them that no matter how long the night lasted, he was not going to step aside. Minutes continued to crawl past while the storm raged outside the Iron Horse bar. Then at last, faint red and blue lights flickered across the rain-soaked windows as a sheriff patrol vehicle turned off the highway and rolled slowly into the gravel lot. The flashing red and blue lights from the sheriff patrol vehicle painted moving shadows across the rain-soaked windows of the Iron Horse bar. The glow reflected off chrome motorcycle parts outside and spilled across the wooden floor inside the bar like silent waves of color. For the first time since Emily Carter had burst through the door asking for help, the tension inside the room shifted. Marcus Steele Donovan did not move from his place, but he noticed the small change immediately. Behind him, Emily tightened her grip on his hand when she saw the lights. Her voice came out in a whisper. Is that the police? Marcus nodded once. Yes. That means the waiting part is almost over. Across the room, David Turner had also seen the lights through the window. His shoulders stiffened, and the uneasy confidence he had been forcing into his voice for the past several minutes finally cracked. He glanced toward the door, and then back at Marcus. You really called them? Marcus answered calmly. We told you we would. The patrol vehicle engine shut off outside, and the storm continued to pound against the roof as the door of the cruiser opened. A moment later, the sound of boots crunching across wet gravel reached the entrance of the bar. Every biker in the room remained exactly where he stood. None of them moved toward the door. They did not need to. The situation had already been held in place long enough for the law to arrive. The door opened, and a tall deputy stepped inside, shaking rain from the brim of his hat. His name badge read Deputy Samuel Carter. He paused for a moment just inside the doorway as he took in the unusual scene before him. Nearly 40 bikers stood scattered around the bar, silent and watchful. In the center of the room, Marcus Steele Donovan stood like a wall between a frightened little girl and a nervous man in a soaked denim jacket. Deputy Carter removed his hat and nodded politely. Evening, gentlemen. Looks like I arrived in the middle of something. Frank Wheeler spoke first from near the bar counter. Evening, Deputy. Young girl came in here asking for help. Said that man over there locked her in his truck. We figured it was best to let you sort the rest out. The deputy turned his attention toward David Turner. Is that right, sir? David straightened his jacket as if trying to recover some of the control he had lost. This whole situation is blown out of proportion. That girl is my responsibility, and these men refuse to let me leave with her. Deputy Carter looked toward Marcus. Marcus stepped slightly aside so the deputy could see Emily standing behind him. The girl looked up at the officer with tired eyes, but she did not step away from Marcus' side. The deputy knelt down gently, so he was at eye level with her. What is your name, sweetheart? Emily Carter. The deputy expression softened slightly. All right, Emily. Can you tell me what happened tonight? Emily glanced briefly toward Marcus and then back at the deputy. He locked me in his truck and said we were going away for a long time. I waited until he went inside a gas station, and then I ran. I saw the lights here and asked for help. Deputy Carter listened carefully without interrupting. When she finished, he slowly stood up again and turned toward David Turner. I am going to need to see some identification, and we are going to talk about this outside. David opened his mouth as if preparing another argument, but the look on the deputy's face made him stop. Around them, the bikers remained silent witnesses to the moment. The storm still raged outside the Iron Horse Bar, but inside the truth of the night had finally stepped through the door. Deputy Samuel Carter stood in the center of the Iron Horse Bar with the rain still dripping from the brim of his hat and the low rumble of thunder rolling through the valley outside Cedar Ridge. The room remained quiet as everyone waited for what would happen next. Marcus Steele Donovan stayed beside Emily Carter, his large frame still forming a protective barrier between the frightened girl and David Turner. Emily had not let go of Marcus' hand since the deputy walked through the door. The small warmth of that grip seemed to be the only thing holding her steady after the long run through the storm and the fear of the night. Deputy Carter turned his attention fully toward David Turner. "Sir, I asked you for identification." David hesitated for a moment before slowly reaching into the inside pocket of his jacket. The room watched carefully as he pulled out a worn leather wallet and handed a driver license to the deputy. Carter studied the card under the yellow ceiling light for several seconds. Then he looked back up at the man standing in front of him. "This license says your address is in a town called Fairview. That is over 60 miles from Cedar Ridge." David shifted his stance slightly. "I travel for work. I was passing through." The deputy did not respond immediately. Instead, he turned toward Emily again and spoke gently. "Emily, do you know this man?" The girl shook her head firmly. "No, he is not my dad. He came to the house after my mom got sick. He said he was a friend, but he started making me pack things tonight." Emily's voice trembled as she continued. "He said we were leaving and nobody needed to know where we were going." The deputy's expression hardened as he listened. He slowly turned back toward David Turner. Long Night slowly turned toward something safer. The flashing lights of the sheriff patrol vehicles slowly disappeared into the dark highway beyond Cedar Ridge, while the storm above the valley began to weaken. The rain that had once hammered the roof of the Iron Horse Bar now fell in a softer, steady rhythm. Inside the bar, the tension that had filled the room for the past hour finally began to fade. The riders who had stood silently along the walls and beside the wooden tables slowly relaxed their posture. Some returned to their chairs while others moved back toward the counter where unfinished drinks waited. The storm outside had not completely passed, but the worst of the night was over. Marcus Steele Donovan remained near the center of the room, with Emily Carter still standing beside him. The little girl looked smaller now that the danger had passed, and exhaustion had finally caught up with her. The long run through the rain, the fear of being taken away, and the long wait for help had drained nearly all her strength. Marcus noticed the way her shoulders drooped and gently guided her toward a nearby booth along the wall. "Sit down for a moment, kid. You look like you ran half the county tonight." Emily managed a small, tired smile and climbed onto the bench seat. Frank Wheeler walked over carrying a mug of warm cocoa that someone in the kitchen had prepared. He set it carefully on the table in front of her. "Drink this slow. It will help warm you up." Emily wrapped her small hands around the mug and nodded gratefully. "Thank you." For a few minutes the bar remained quiet except for the low sound of rain and the soft clink of dishes from the kitchen. Then the door opened again and Deputy Samuel Carter stepped back inside, shaking the last drops of rain from his jacket. Several riders looked up as he walked toward Marcus and Emily. The deputy's expression was calmer now. "I spoke with the station and with the hospital in Pine Creek. Your mother is still there, and the staff confirmed your name." Emily's eyes widened slightly with relief. "Is she going to be all right?" The deputy nodded gently. "She is getting better, and the nurses are expecting you tomorrow morning. We will take you there first thing after the road's clear." Emily let out a long breath she had been holding all night. Marcus leaned slightly against the booth and looked toward the deputy. "What about the man?" Deputy Carter folded his arms. He had no legal documents connecting him to the child, and his story changed 3 times during the drive to the station. For now, he will be staying in a holding cell until the investigators from the county office arrive in the morning. The room grew quiet again for a moment as the riders absorbed the news. Marcus finally looked back down at Emily. She had finished half the cocoa, and the color had started returning to her cheeks. "You picked the right place to run tonight." Emily looked around the room at the men who had stood between her and the storm outside. "I was scared when I came in. I thought everyone here would be angry." Frank Wheeler chuckled softly from beside the table. "Most people think that when they see a room full of bikers." Emily smiled faintly and looked back at Marcus. "But you helped me." Marcus shrugged slightly. "Sometimes helping someone just means standing in the right place when they need it." Outside, the rain continued to fall softly over Cedar Ridge, and the long night finally began to settle into quiet. The riders of the Iron Horse Bar returned to their seats while Emily Carter rested safely inside the warm light of the building, knowing that by morning the road ahead would lead her back to her family instead of away from it.